Welcome to the TDS Early Years podcast. Now, each week we're going to be joined by different educational experts from across the globe who are going to offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help us as practitioners unlock all the potential for learning that there is in the early years. So to be first to hear about future episodes and to access all of the follow-up content, including ideas for your own setting, Pinterest, mood boards, and loads more, you can sign up for exclusive access using the link in our podcast description. Hello and welcome back to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast, all about outdoor play. And today I am talking to Niki Buchan, all about nature-based pedagogy. So Niki, we talked a little bit last time about what was nature-based pedagogy. And I think what I'd like to explore a little bit more is you and I are converts to this, but what we believe the benefits are for the children in being allowed to explore nature a little bit more.
Okay, that's a favorite topic of mine as well. Because when I'm in nature, I feel like I'm a child again. I get as enthusiastic and as mystified and that awe and wonder that you get when you're outside that children have. I feel that very strongly. And I think what we have to remember is that the human brain is drawn to the unusual or to the novel or to things that are different. And when you're in a classroom, not much changes. The practitioner might put new resources out or different resources. But when you're in nature, there's all that unexpected stuff. So if it's rain, there's all these giant puddles and you walk under a tree and you get wet because you've touched the leaves and you've had an unexpected shower. Or, there's suddenly a dead bird. And dead birds are dead interesting when you're 3 and 4 and 5 years old. And even when you're my age, because you start wondering why, what happened, etc. So because things are different and novel and interesting and because nature changes all the time, there might be wind one day and then you'll have lots of sticks on the ground, or even in your playground, you might find that all the equipment is blown over because nature's been through that, or It's rained and everything is wet and soggy. So just by being nature and being so changeable, children are drawn to that because they try to find all the novel and the interesting bits.
I think you're dead right. And it is that unpredictability of nature and weather and sound and that kind of circle of life. And I get, I've worked with lots of practitioners over the years, and invariably we have class pets, which might be fish or when they hatch chicks or whatever it may be. And death is part of what we do. But then a lot of what we are kind of conditioned to do is to shield children from things like the dead bird or the dead fish. So the fish goes down the loo and another one just appears in the tank. Or I remember once working with a setting where they're hatching chicks and one died, and the children were really excited about the chicks coming out. And then we got there in the morning and one of them had come out of the egg and died. And the adults were basically saying, right, we need to just scoop that out quickly before the children get in. And we had a big discussion about, do we let the children come and see that one of the chicks has died and have an opportunity to discuss death? I mean, I did a blog post about that many moons ago, and somebody messaged me privately to say I didn't want to put this in the blog comment, but we had a chick that died when it came out of the egg. And the children were more fascinated with the dead chick than they were interested in the live chicks. And I'm not advocating this as practice, but this is what somebody did do. She didn't want to she wanted the children to be able to experience the dead animal, but not to pass it around the circle, as it were. So what she did was got a laminating pouch and an iron, and she put the dead bird in the laminating pouch and ironed around it so it was sealed in. And she said the best circle time they ever had was when they passed around a laminate. I mean, but they said the discussion, the language, the fascination. So I think sometimes we do shield children from things that we are a little bit afraid of as adults. But actually what you tend to find is they take it in their stride because they have usually such an innocent view of the world, and they're just fascinated by something which is the only guarantee that any of us have got in life, that death is going to come at some point.
Yeah. I had a similar story with somebody contacted me and said, the fish has died. I'm going to take it out and I'm going to run to the pet shop and we'll get another fish. And, because I don't want the children to be traumatized or upset by the fish. And I said, no, leave it, let them find it, and then have those conversations. got it out. The children sympathized a bit. And then they said, can we watch you flush it down the loo? So, very matter of fact, etc. But, we have to remember, as humans, we elements of nature. And that we have this natural affinity to nature. And very young children have that very strongly. Even a baby will go outside and find an ant or find a worm and, absolutely fascinated by it because they have an automatic connection to nature and they are better at accepting what's going to happen. We lose that as we get older, or some people lose that as they get older, which I think is sad.
And I think that's just through conditioning and life and the fact that as a society, we move indoors very early and we stay indoors and we sit in cars. And, even between when I was young and when my now adult boys were young, and, I'm like that proper old dad that will say, me and your Uncle Gareth used to go out on a Saturday morning and we didn't come back till tea time. We went up Granty's Pond and we used to catch newts in jam jars and we were wet and cold and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And even now, my kind of young adult boys are hopping in Ubers to get themselves to an indoor space, to hop on an Uber, to come back. They don't even walk in the rain. And I think as society, we're all a bit like that. But when you are thinking that, if I go and stand in an outdoor space and raindrops fall on the top of my head and trickle down through my hair and I feel it on my skin and I get cold and I get wet, then your brain and your body is really kicking into action and you're firing all sorts of synapses and you're having feelings and emotional responses and you're making predictions about what might happen. You're recalling memory about what you could do. You're strategizing, you're using creativity, and all that is standing under raindrops. So if you take that very simple experience away and come and sit inside and say, "Ooh, it looks like it's raining outside today," then you've taken away all of that neurological opportunity for processing and learning. That's why just stepping through the door in itself opens this massive opportunity for children to learn in a variety of different ways. So not just facts and figures, but to learn how to be human, really.
Exactly. And I love to look at the difference between academic and intellectual learning, according to Lillian Katz. Intellectual learning, she said, is about hypothesizing and theorizing and predicting and problem solving, and all that happens in the outdoors, whereas the academic learning is more sort of the rote learning stuff, whereas the children come up with all kinds of their own philosophies and their own concepts and their own ideas about the outdoors. And I loved your... sorry?
The link that's often missing for me is the fact that when you have children who begin to think in that more creative way, then academically, in the kind of purest sense of the formal academics, they often tend to do way better or as well because they're becoming really creative thinking problem solvers. Whereas children who just think the academic goal is all they've got to achieve can often become very pressurized, very frustrated, as can adults. And the fact that a lot of us are working to curriculums that have been set by governments that are not really based on child development, but are based on academic outcomes, which don't, for me, produce the best kind of human being, because you want somebody that's, able to do all the things that we need you to do academically, but also who can feel and think and create, because they're going to be the best kind of person.
Yeah. And it's about the scientific thinking and being outside. It's all about scientific thinking. All the STEM subjects can be visited outside. And children notice things more, when you're outside, and they notice the raindrop. They notice, as you said, the drops trickling down. So the sensory input they're getting is far greater in an outside space than it is in an inside space. And we all know that we learn through our senses and through movement. And I find that practitioners are less likely to restrict children outdoors than they are indoors, because indoors is a smaller space, there's furniture in there. But as soon as they let the children go outside, whether you've got a beautiful forest or whether you're in a yard, or even if it's a garden space that doesn't have much nature, but just the fact that they're outside, they've got the sun on them, they've got the wind on them, and they're not restricted in their movements, because, as you said previously, we all know that children learn through movement and through being active, and that by restricting them, we're stifling that learning. And also, children only develop that impulse control when they're about 4.5 years old. And, and that's exactly when we've been expecting them to be sitting still and controlling their body before that, and their, self-control, but it doesn't happen until about that age. So those are all things that they can practice in the outdoor space, in a bigger space.
So we know cognitively that children, that impulse control you're not born with the ability to do that. You develop that over time. And you don't develop that ability by being put in stressful situations where you just don't do that. And therefore you get into trouble for not doing it. You develop it by being able to be creative and to be a thinker and go out into the big space that we've talked about. So you're exactly right. And I think the other thing that's worth pulling out of this is that when we are thinking about outdoor spaces often, especially if you're working in kindergartens, nurseries, schools, to make it a practical space, it will be paved or it'll be tarmacked or it'll have, what often is called in the UK easy fall, which is the rubberized setting. And often the grass is taken away and fake grass is put in its place. But then what you're creating is an outdoor space, which is better than nothing. And you can go out there and you can feel the wind and you can feel the rain. But one of the things that's really magical about nature-based pedagogy is the nature bit. So the fact that soil turns into mud when it gets wet and that leaves are slippy underfoot and that wood will get, moss and fungi on it when it gets damp. So I think it's not just about creating an immaculate outdoor space that you spend thousands of pounds on that then is devoid of nature. The really key bit about nature-based pedagogy is you try and bring in as much nature as you possibly can.
Yes. And I think naturally evolving nature. I mean, I've seen here in Australia, we also unfortunately have the artificial turf and the artificial rubber surfaces. And the practitioners spend an awful lot of time with those things that blow the leaves off everything. And you go, well, just leave the leaves. That's nature. We don't have to get rid of nature. Nature's sort of trying to take over again. And they spend a lot of time trying to get rid of the leaves. And then you see children with their little hands outside the fence trying to catch weeds or bits of nature to bring back into those spaces. And, by trying to keep the children safe and the space clean, especially in Australia, we've actually created, quite a few hazards with those artificial surfaces because of our heat. And, we've had children with burnt feet because obviously the children are very often barefoot. But I also have been on them and they've been very slippery if you're in a rainy space.
Yeah, and they do. And I think in the UK, we have lots of issues with the fact that they get very slippery. And if it's a dark space, they get quite moldy, which means, but also I think you're right. The joy in just digging a hole with a stick can be huge, and that you find little bits of treasure, which might be a stone or a little bit of china or a woodlouse that isn't going to happen. Or even if you're going on a mini beast hunt, or all of those things aren't going to happen if your space is devoid of nature. So again, it's trying, I think, if you've got one of those spaces already and you think, well, that's all well and good, but I've inherited a space that's all tarmacked and, paved and stoned. It's about, as you say, trying to leave bits of nature there, like your leaves and your twigs, but also trying to bring some elements of nature in. So what kind of ways could there be that people could bring more nature into a space that's been kind of cleared of all the natural elements?
Oh, I think that's in some ways quite an easy one. Obviously, planting plants. So even getting, if you've got a budget or a tight budget, tractor tires or tires and put plants in them, different kinds of plants in those spaces. But also speak to the families, the parents, and say, well, when you're trimming your garden, we'd like the garden trimmings. So then you'll get all these sticks and the leaves that the children can use. Even things like asking parents to bring in, if they've been given a bunch of flowers and they're starting to wilt a bit and they're nearly ready for the compost, to say, bring them in. We can make petal perfume. The children can make, we can crush them. They can have all those experiences. And also bringing soil in and bringing stones in and putting it on top of your artificial surfaces. Here I recommend quite often that I just say to people, just put bark on top of your softball. It's like double softball, but at least the children are getting the natural stuff. And yes, some of it might walk into the classroom, but then give them a broom and they can sweep it out again. But, the important bit is that they do have that link to nature. And the other thing to look at is things like trees, people like tree surgeons. that they'll very often very happy for you to take the wood slices or the logs, because it costs money to chip them. So if you say, well, we're looking for slices, and even if you have in Australia, they often have what they call busy bees, where they have the parents coming in and helping. Right. And if you're just doing pretty little things indoors, you don't get the same reaction as if you say, well, we're going to be sawing, bring your chainsaws, and we're going to make lots of wood cookies and logs and things that the children can use and play with.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point.
There's no reason. Yeah.
And in the UK, we know that every local authority has a tree surgeon attached to the local authority that does local authority tree surgery. So I know I've worked with settings that have just contacted their local authority tree surgeon and basically said, this is what we'd like, what can you do? And sometimes you can forge a really lovely relationship that's an ongoing thing. And they will just slice you some cookies, or they'll bring you a big log to sit on, or whatever it may be. So absolutely bring in any bits you can. I think it's a really good point about it doesn't always have to be pristine. So when we're looking for flowers, for things even just like deconstructing or making petal perfume, or just experiencing the wilting, decaying death of plants, which is also fascinating. Yeah. I remember once working in a setting where they had found a pear at the bottom of their fruit bowl that had gone all brown and mushy and horrible. And so what they did was got a bowl of fruit and just left it to go mouldy so the children can watch it mould. And again, they were fascinated with it because the oranges went all green and furry. And I think sometimes as practitioners, there will be people listening to this thinking, oh, the thought of children sticking their hands into soggy, wet leaves that have been outside. What if a cat's weed on them? Or, the thought of picking up worms and they get dirt under their fingernails. What if they put their fingers in their mouth? I mean, there is practitioner concern over that. Have you any thoughts about why we should allow children to do that and try and quieten that voice a little bit?
Well, I think we have to stop thinking catastrophically to start off with. I mean, oranges that are green, it's like that's penicillin. It's an antibiotic. We can look at that. But also looking at some of the research, the soil's got something called a Mycobacterium vaccae in it, and that enables the body to release serotonin, which is what's in our antidepressants. And so just digging in soil, getting soil on your hands is a natural antidepressant. Also, where they talk about the increase in children with asthma and allergies, and they're linking it to children that have been kept too clean. And now we've just had COVID, and I'm seeing small children arrive at the settings with their antibacterial or their disinfectant stuff, and they're constantly washing their hands. And I'm going, hang on, And some more recent research shows that children that are too clean, that could also lead to type 1 diabetes or multiple sclerosis. I mean, those are serious conditions. I would let my children play in the soil and in the sand. And obviously, if you know that there's lead in the soil, then you would purchase soil and put it above ground. Or if there's a cat and you know that there's a cat or a dog in that environment, you're not going to use that. But worst case scenario, if they do touch it, they always, they need to wash their hands before they eat so that it doesn't go into their mouth.
And again, it's about having, like we talked about before, it's having those strategies that you enable children that if they come across something they're not sure about, or if they do find a bit of cat poo, that they know what to do because they've assessed that risk. And on that rather unsavory note of cat poo, I think we are going to end this episode. We've had some really good tips and advice there about how to make your space a little more natural. And so in the next episode, we're going to investigate a little bit more some of the international views around how, especially in your experience and a little bit in mine, and been lucky enough to travel around the world and work with early childhood settings, how there are different views to nature-based pedagogy, but also try and pick out some of the really great elements that we've seen. So for this episode, for all your wonderful insights, thanks very much, Niki.
Thank you, Alistair. I look forward to the next episode.
So I would just like to say a huge thank you to Niki Buchan for joining us and providing such brilliant insights into nature-based pedagogy throughout the world. You've been listening to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and of course with the wonderful Niki Buchan. If you've been inspired by what we've been talking about today, then don't forget you can sign up via the link in the episode notes. And then you'll be the first to hear about any future podcasts, but you can also access some really useful follow-up content, including lots of ideas for your setting and Pinterest boards that will help you shop for nature-based resources.